Welcome to the Top 200 podcast with your host, Social Forum.
What's up, everybody? This is Social Forum from High School Top 200, and this is the Monday morning meeting done in the evening. And it's purposely done on the evening. I'm going to give my reasons for it too, but I hope everybody's had a good weekend and everyone's feeling good, feeling better, feeling a bit sick too myself. I don't know, it's just cold. Because I work early in the morning, just like cold outside as well, so while everyone's sleeping in their warm beds, I'm in a little hut making sure the temple's safe. But so over this weekend, and I just want to touch on some of the games that I saw, and obviously I was at the CNI, their finals day, which is such a good thing to have. I wish the Super 8 did the same. It would be pretty cool if they did on like a Friday and Saturday, like Friday, I don't know, Super 8 on Friday, then the CNI on Saturday or something like that. Because like having all the teams show up at one place, being able to finish the season with all the teams together and all the players together and all that kind of stuff, and everyone sort of just meet up again, and all the cool fellas that you've seen players over the year, you just get to meet up with them again, because I know that a lot of you guys billet out to each other, so you guys get to sort of talk and hang out at nights before the game the next day when you want to like punch each other's heads in. But it was such a cool day. I went and saw St. John's College Hastings first, then played Rathkill. First time seeing St. John's, alive. And as always, they always have good players. Like the team as a whole sometimes are not the strongest. Like I've had stronger years before than this year, but they do have like a lot of good talent that I really did like. And some of the boys that were in that team that I thought were really good standouts, and obviously really good players at the same time. And even with Rathkill, with Woodamoo Bartlett, I think it made a big made a big difference in terms of the way that they play, and obviously the way that they defend, because they need Woodamoo out there as their sort of main source of defense. He makes probably the most tackles, makes all the right calls defensively, things like that, and he's just that big of a player. Even though Will Cole played really good, Max was another one played really good that I liked too. Patrick on the other side, I thought he had a great game as well, running from number 8. Just too big and strong for them to stop, and them getting their win. And then I also watched Lindisfarne and Francis Douglas, that was on the other field too. I watched their second half, and it was the same thing. I mean, like King's House had a really had a really good game. I thought he was real sharp on the day, and it was just one of those kind of things. And I don't know. I was kind of watching that. I don't know how. There must be like a lot of mental prep in terms of trying to get yourself up for the game, knowing that it's your last game. Maybe that it's not a good placing game or something like, because they were like the last grading games of the season, sort of where you fall in their rankings, and you're kind of playing for that. I don't know how, either the mentality of the game or how much you really care, or if you just want to go out there and just try and smash somebody, because that's kind of like the nature of that when you're sort of not in the semi-finals or anything like that. So it's just like, I'll just go out there and see if I can smoke somebody. But some players were serious. I could see the other players just weren't interested. They were just keen for a game of rugby, but weren't really trying to win. And that's perfectly that's understandable. I mean, I'll probably be in that same position too. I'll probably just like, I just want to try and smash someone, see if I just get some hits, and I don't know, take care of my own pride. It's kind of like all it is to me, but that's kind of how it was. But the finals, like, so when I went and watched Fielding and in the St. John's final, I think that was the one where, and I think because it's like this was the second game. The first game obviously was St. John's at Fielding. Is that they were played at Fielding. It was a wet day, rainy as hell, real slippery, real muddy, and all that kind of stuff. And in that first game, even though the first half was pretty close, like St. John's weren't out to this big massive lead or anything like that, but St. John's was winning the matchups in the forwards. They were competing at every single ruck. They were winning every single breakdown. It seemed like all the passes seemed to stick, and the backline was running, and Fielding in that first game really couldn't do that much. And they really got stuck, and then once that second half kicked in, St. John's really just ran away with that game and did make Fielding look pretty average. And because they weren't winning the breakdowns as much as they were used to, I kind of feel like Fielding took a step back and then didn't know how to adapt when they started losing the breakdown, and because they'd never been in that kind of situation. Like even against Hastings, like in the preseason game, they weren't losing the breakdowns against Hastings. They were actually, from my recollection of it, I actually picked Fielding's forward pack to be better, and they'd never struggled like that. But when it came to St. John's, they really did struggle in that first game. And so when I came to watching the second game, and my thoughts of it kind of was like, they do have to match up. They can't lose a breakdown. Like even if they don't win it, they just can't. They have to at least win 45% of it most of the time. They have to win their own ball. They can't just get blown off the field and all that kind of stuff. And I had those kind of thoughts in my head driving down to the game, and just wondering how Vernon and William was going to go, because those two are obviously the two main guys up front. And for the forward pack, as much as Mo Basin at number 8 is, and how much he is to their forward pack, as well as Sam Kane, who's in there at lock, if it's not for Vernon and William, if they don't go forward, nobody else really moves, to be honest. Like their impact on the game is so much more important to that Fielding team than anybody else on that team. Even if Vernon did it by himself, if William's not going, then they don't have that same effect. Even if William was going and Vernon didn't really have, like, it's the same thing. It's like they both have to do it at the same time and both be on the same page. Well, that's just bloody what happened, to be honest. And coming into this game, and straight away, both Vernon and William both had 2 massive runs each within the first 3 to 5 minutes. Both of them had some big massive runs where they broke a bunch of tackles, they were dragging tacklers, things like that, and then it built on from there, and then they just didn't stop. This is the first time I've ever seen St. John's also not win at the breakdowns, really struggle at the rucks. They weren't stopping tacklers. They weren't stopping runners like they usually do, because, like, remember, St. John's defense this year has been so strong that there was only one game where they had. There was only one game this season that wasn't even a CNI game where someone scored over like 15 points or something like that. They just lost to Rotorua Boys when Rotorua Boys was number 1, and they went to Rotorua Boys and they lost by 3 points, which was like 36-33, something like that. And that was the highest points they ever got scored on them in the season, but they also scored 33 points at the same time. So they easily had the offensive side of it, but lacked on the defense. And the CNI, no one even came close to scoring, even pretty much even in the teens. Like, they were struggling to score that many points because the defense was so strong. And they did it most of the time led by Micah. Micah's the main one there. He's the number 7, the year 12 number 7, who I think will be in New Zealand secondary schools next year, just by the way that he plays. It's him. Liam McPherson is the other one, and then Adrian Farafara is the other one, and that's the loose trio. Those 3 alone, to me, lead the defense. And then when you kind of look at it after that, all the boys from the, all the boys, then you got like Cade and in the second row along with Norman as well. Those two guys in the lock position, because Cade's like this blind side. He's year 12. He looks like he's about 6'1", 6'2", maybe. But he's real energetic, He's solid on defense. Norman's just this big, this massive dude that just smashes through. And then those guys are usually the ones that come right after Micah and right after Liam and Adrian, and they take care of all the other stuff. And that's how they've been winning all their games. Is that once that forward pack takes care of stuff, like especially after Micah just gets the players straight away and they're on the ground. He doesn't even need 2 men tackles. Like, he just does it by himself, and all the boys are right there behind him to back him up, and they usually get their turnovers. They usually get fast, quick ball. Once turnovers go over, then you still got, once they get the turnover, Halen's always there. Halen goes out to Daniel to Jack to Wesley, and then everybody else is in front of it. Then they score their points. This is not what happened in this fielding game. They could not break Fielding's forward pack dominance. They could not break. They could not tackle them and push them back like they were doing in the first game. They were always meeting them at the advantage line, but then getting pushed back, and Fielding were just making ground after contact. They were just hitting, driving them back a couple of steps, hitting again, driving back a couple of steps, hitting again, and then after that, then there's breaks and all that kind of stuff. St. John's just couldn't stop it. And even though Micah you could see how much work rate he had, but then the effect side of it just wasn't there like it usually was. Even Liam was the same. It was like, it's the quietest game I've seen both of them play, and they're real like energetic players. But it just wasn't working in this game. It just wasn't working. And then, and even when St. John's were scoring their points, they were scoring their points based off like their moves. Like there's this one where Jack scores a try off a line out, and it just looks so simple. It looks so easy that he just broke through this line and just saw this clear gap. And in fact, Jack probably played the best out of St. John's on the day. He was probably their best player on the day. Daniel was quiet, Michael was quiet, Wesley was quiet. The back three didn't get anything. Ami didn't get anything. Keone never got anything. What's his name? Keenan. He didn't get anything. And the reason why the back three weren't getting any ball is because Fielding had no reason to kick the ball. They were so dominant up front that they didn't need to kick the ball to get out of of their half. They were sort of just running it. Now, if that pressure's not there like it usually is, if the pressure's there like it usually is, every team will be kicking away to this back three, and then once Ami gets the ball, bro, he makes a break, and Kearney's like, with his footwork and that, he just makes all these, and Kieran running wise the same as like, when they have the ball, they're dangerous. But if you don't give them any balls, that's like, what's the use of them, to be honest? And that's how they took them out of the game. It's just like, well, they don't give them any position, they're not gonna do anything with it. So that's kind of how Fielding was the whole game, and St. John's just couldn't stop them from doing anything. And it's strange too that it was only 11 points in it, yet if you watch the game, and the feeling of the game was it was just all Fielding. It was just all Fielding, because like the tries that came out of St. John's were just so quick and just so effortlessly done that you kind of didn't feel a build-up of anything. Like, you felt Fielding build up to where all their points were coming and to where they kicked penalties and things like that. But when St. John's had it, it was just different. It just happened. Scored a try, kicked it, and then when it kicked off, and then you kind of forgot about the fact like that they scored a try, and you still had this feeling like, oh yeah, Fielding's still in control, and that's kind of how it was. Like the energy from the point scoring of St. John's just wasn't the same as what it was for Fielding, because you kind of like appreciated it more coming around Fielding because it had so much work. Vern just didn't stop. William just didn't stop. Mo was just always there. And I think it's just one of those things that it's not just like on the day stuff. It's not just that. It might have just been the fact that Fielding hated the fact that they lost. And it wasn't even just about them losing. It was just like the way that they lost and the point scores that, because it was like 48 or something like that. More the embarrassment of it and them not letting it happen again was kind of like that kind of feeling, and you could kind of see that in Fielding, and it really did pay off. It really did come out like that, and fully deserved the win. They fully deserved the win, and they played so good. And then you look at Hamilton. Hamilton boys in Rotorua, and it was kind of the same thing. Hamilton boys just couldn't compete with that forward pack of Rotorua, and even though their tries came out of these, you could say individual tries, but I mean like when Rotorua was scoring points, it was just like this build up and this feeling of like you felt everything they went through to get their try, that it sort of lingered. But then when Hamilton scored, you're just like, oh, that was a great try, but then forgot about it. And then you just kind of saw that Rotorua, even when Rotorua held that lead for so long, you could feel like they were holding that lead, and you could feel like how much work they were putting in to hold that lead too. And then you get like someone like obviously Peyton Spencer having just this brilliance, individual brilliance to score a try that he just made it look easy. But even then you're like, oh, you could kind of feel like Rotorua was going to have some kind of response to that, which they did. And Rotorua deserved to win that game 100%. Like it really was their day. It really was Rotorua's day, and they really just jumped on it and made it work for them. And I think like, and I think I know why those two Hamilton teams lost. And I kind of figured it out too, because we have the Waikato River here, and there's this Māori legend that talks about this time of the year. No, I'm just joking. They just lost because they weren't as good. It's got nothing to do with all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I'm not even Māori. What are you talking about? So this is why I've taken so long to do this, right? I've taken so long to put this out because I've been thinking about the rankings. And the rankings, I've only got 2 more weeks of rankings left, and then it's set for the year, and then it's finished. The rankings are finished, and however it sits and stays, that's how it is. And then we just go into nationals, and you kind of have to win nationals to be the top whatever. Regardless of what the rankings say, you still have to play all the games. And whoever's national champs on the day, that's just the national champs. That's how it works. That's how everything works. But in terms of my rankings, what the problem is that everyone has lost games except for John McGlashan. Now, the way that I do it is that I sort of have arguments with myself and go, try and prove to myself why someone should be number one. Hamilton, you could say they still deserve to sit at number one because it's the first game that they've lost. Lost one late in the season. They lost to Rotorua Boys, who's ranked 7th, who used to be number one. And the loss that they had, they lost to a very good team. May have been the finals. Maybe, that could be the argument. It's only one loss. Everyone loses one and is entitled to kind of one loss anyway. And they lost to a team that was predominantly the number one team in the country for a long time before they lost, their first game. And then Rotorua ended up losing a second, So leaving Hamilton at number one could be a possibility. St. John's have lost 2 games. And they're sitting at number 2. You could argue the fact that they've lost against a fielding team who's been ranked in the top 10 since the start of the year. They were ranked top 5, close to the second rank as well. And the 2 games that St. John's have lost have been against Rotorua boys, who were the number 1 ranked team at the time that they lost, as well as lost to fielding even now, who's ranked 9th. Been dominant all year. Lost in 2 games that they were really close to winning in. One losing by 3 points. The second game they lost by 11 points. And that's only 2 losses of the year of 10 games. So keeping there, even them vying for the number 1 spot, may not be successful, but why should they move outside of the top 5? Is the other thing. Like, if I was a St. John's supporter, I would ask those questions. Because you could also put the fact that it's just like, well, if you look at our points for and against, we're fully dominant on the for side, and then our defensive shows in the scorings that they've had, the scorer lines that they've had, is where it's so one-sided of how much points they've scored. They could have that kind of argument of why they should still to remain even top 3. St. Peter's could have the same argument as like, well, we've only lost 1 game all year, and that was to St. Bede's, and every other team that they've played against have won. Only 1 loss on the season, and they deserve to be the number 1. Now, you could say we've just lost to a Christchurch team, to a St. Bede's team, and you could say that's our only loss, but then the argument against that is like, well, if you lost to St. Bede's, and St. Bede's has lost 2 games to St. Thomas and Nelson College, you could say also that St. Peter's is not better than those 2 teams. Just based off who St. Bede's has also lost to. Like, if St. Peter's went down to Christchurch and beat St. Bede's, like, this wouldn't be an argument. This wouldn't even be a discussion. I'd be like, yeah, St. Peter's is number 1. But now that you've put in the discussion, like, we lost to St. Bede's, you're like, okay, well, but St. Bede's has also lost 2 games too. And you're kind of saying that you can't beat those teams either. If St. Bede's can't beat those teams, then you're potentially saying that St. Peter's can't beat those 2 teams. And then that's the dynamic that you have here, is it's like, you're not just taking the person that you lost to, but also who that team also lost to as well. And that's the kind of mentality that you have to have when you're starting to do these kind of rankings and you're thinking about all this kind of stuff. And you could even say that St. Peter's, in terms of the players, we're not quite ready, because this is probably the first time a lot of these kids have probably been on planes or been down to the South Island, or, just the idea of traveling for a game is just like, just got that real feel-good stuff to it. Be like, man, let's check this out. When in high school, we're traveling to a game, flying on a plane to a game, things like that. Like, all that kind of stuff can be real exciting. So in terms of focus on that, like, it takes a strong team to focus and be ready to play a game like this and to try and win. And St. Bede's just beat them on the day. And so the argument for that is that you could look at St. Peter's, and St. Peter's could go, hey, we lost to a good St. Bede's team on the day, and but we've only got 1 loss. We're still beating everybody else, and we're the top in Auckland, and and the top easily, to be honest. John McGlashan is the other one that's going to have the argument too, why they're not number 1. And the arguments is fine, saying that they're still they're still the unbeaten team in the country. But then the resume has to come back and it has to support that, The resume has to support that. And what the resume shows is that they're a great Highlanders team. but they haven't ventured out really to play anybody else. And then the only team that you can really look at is, you can only really look at the fact that they played Tauranga Boys in the preseason and they lost. And then you can say also that, well, John McGlashan have been in Southland. Southland went up and beat Kings. And then you can sort of go, where do we weigh that up in terms of how convincing that is? The resume and the strength of your schedule also has to sort of count in your favour. And all we know for John McGlashan is that they are the best in the Highlanders, and probably one of the best in the South Island. And we're just taking a guess at the one of the best because they've beaten some of those Highlanders teams convincingly, but the consistency of good games is not the same thing that you'll get in Christchurch. Now, to put them in that situation of Christchurch, like, well, okay, let's think about it. If they had like a run of, let's say, Nelson College, St. Bede's, sort of like Rotorua, Christ, then Christchurch Boys, then someone like Marlborough, and then St. Thomas, and then like if you had that run, how good would they be in that run of hard games at a time? And that's where you'll get like a better gauge on how good this team can step up from week to week, because in the Highlanders competition, and like a lot of you have been following high school top 200 for a long time, it's like we all know that they don't have a well-balanced competition down there. It's 4 teams pretty much, and as good as Waitaki Boys is getting with sort of the bigger island boys starting to move down there, that's still going to take some time. Schools like Dunstan High School, Mount Aspiring, St. Kevin's, Wakatipu, like all these other teams down there still have to be able to lift all their games to make sure that they show the rest of the country that the Highlanders region has a really good competition that can match up with other people. In all honesty, they just don't. You got 4 teams and that's kind of it. And if those 4 teams don't perform well and they don't travel well outside of their competition and beat other teams outside of their competition, then it's not going to look good on them. It's not going to look good for them. Even when Kings High School went to Shirley and they lost, Kings High School goes, well, we didn't take up our best team. Well, that's your problem. Shirley goes, oh yeah, we didn't actually play some of our players because we had a big game and we had a lot of sicknesses, so we kind of threw a half first 15, half B team together and we played them and we still won. It's like, yeah, well, Kings High School, that's still your fault. Like, if you want to win all these games, you just got to back up like that. That's just what you need to do. So the convincing side of it is that like your strength of your schedule has to also reflect that you can play big games in a row and still come out winners regardless of the situation. Like even St. Peter's traveling down to St. Bede's in a 1A competition is massive for them. Like that's not like an easy thing to do. So them even losing that game to me is just like, it's a surprise, but like kind of not really, because they're playing hard games as well. Then they added another hard one to it. Even when St. Bede's last year had to travel up, it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, they're playing in a hard competition down in Christchurch, and then they try and have to back it up with a 1A school. Those things are not easy. They're not easy at all.
You remember Sasha? Yeah. So Sasha told her it was a big deal.
So John McGlashan have that behind them. They still may be 12-12, but the strength of schedule is going to be the one that restricts them. Like, I don't know if they should be number 1, because the other thing is that like if let's say that if John McGlashan comes out of the South Island and represents the top 4 out of the South Island, which is a real possibility, because I actually do think that they're better than Nelson. I do think that they're better than St. Bede's and St. Thomas and all that kind of stuff. But if they come up to the top 4 with this number 1 ranking and it doesn't pay out, and we've got a long history, and a lot of people in South Island are going to get pissed. They're all going to get pissed off because they think I'm trying to be a dick about it when we say that the South Island teams don't show up. Go and look at the top 4 appearances, and then you tell me if the South Island teams show up. You go and do that and tell me how many South Island teams make it to the finals. Let's see if I'm being a dick about it. But it's just not a good showing. I think the last time was like, I think my mates were playing for Wesley when Wesley played St. Bede's. Oh, no. Christchurch boys, I think, had a run of 4 finals from like 2005 to 2009 or something like that. But then that was like the last time that a South Island team actually got to the finals. Other than that, they've lost the first game on the first day almost every single year. Every single year. Now, if I gave John McGlashan the number 1 ranking, and it ends up the season that they're the number 1 team in the country, and then they come up and don't show up well, because all the evidence to me shows that John McGlashan's doesn't have a strong backing behind them, then it's not going to look good for them either coming up with that number one ranking. Like I'd love to see them blow out Nelson College and then St. Bede's and even Christchurch boys and St. Thomas, just blow them out and be like, yeah, this is how good we are. And I'll be like, oh cool, that's pretty convincing. But on one week they'll blow out King's High School, then the next week they'll just win. Like it's kind of confusing that way. Like when you sort of watch it, and John McGlashan's got some of the biggest forwards too. Like Mitch, I think will be a New Zealand secondary school. Jonty will come close. Keegan's really good. I like Ben Joseph's like a solid blindside who I think will blow up actually after he leaves school. He'll be like a way better player. You still got Phoenix, and like there's just so many of those players, and then you got their midfield who's just so good, and I wrote about it too. It's just like Jack and Josh so good, and then you got Felix coming off the bench. Like they just a good squad, but can they consistently bring that every single game against really good teams, just like how you would do it in the Super 8 or in the 1A? I just wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. It's just not... like even the Wellington competition is maybe even just a bit better. I think the Wellington... I think... Actually, because that's kind of strange. Like, I think if you got the top 4... If you got John McGlashan, King's High School, Southland boys, and Otago boys, and you matched them up with like Scots College, Silverstream, Town, and Wellington, even though Scots didn't make the thing, but that was based on like points and all that kind of stuff because they had some penalties, but those 4 going at it, that would be a good competition, just having those 4 teams. I think that would be a pretty good competition. But even those 8 teams together, like who is actually better? Because that's pretty much both of those competitions is like those top 4 teams and then the other top 4 teams, and that's kind of about it. For most of the time, St. Brendan's had a really good year this year, as well as Hibs, but for the most years, it's just those 4 teams on both of those competitions. So, like, that argument's pretty hard to sort of make. Hastings is another one as well. Like, when you sort of, like... if you try and like make the argument for Hastings, you kind of have to look at the fact, like, I mean, they lost to Rotorua too. They lost to Rotorua early on, and Rotorua was the number 1 team in the country, and and like Hastings could have won that too. It was just like right in the last seconds where, what's his name, the Samoan prop, he was the one that scored right at the end, and they just beat Hastings right at the end in that game. But then you got other games like the Palmy one where Hastings lost by 1 point, and then that's like another one too that sort of counts against them. And then them losing to Hamilton as well, right in that last seconds, which was like, if he held the ball, they would have won. You know, and so like the argument to that is just like, well, Hastings is sitting at 5th. They've just had sort of better wins, I guess. I mean, because Napier Boys is at 6th, but Napier Boys lost to Hastings Boys. You know, and Napier as well has had their sort of kind of bad run too, in a way of sort of like the losses that they've had. I mean, you know, I think it's just one of those ones. But like even when they beat Rotorua, like that was like another big one too. Is like when Napier beat Rotorua, like that's something that's like a plus on their name too. And they would be one too that was like, well, maybe that resume does stack up well. You know, and this is where I kind of have the argument too from Napier and Hastings crowd, is where they look at John McGlashan and they go, but can John McGlashan handle our teams? And it's like a fair question too. Even though I have to give John McGlashan that respect that they have remained unbeaten in a competition, which is not easy. Hastings and Napier and even Rotorua right now is going to say, nah, they're not better than us though. John McGlashan is not better than us. They can't do it like what we can do. Because Hastings right now is sitting, 8-3. Napier is 10-2. Rotorua is now 10-2. Hamilton's is 9-1 right now. St. John's is 10-2. St. Peter's is 12-1. Fielding is 9-1-2. Remember, because Fielding had that draw against St. Paul's. Like that's the other one too. Is that like it is kind of a stain. It's a stain on the record, and it's not like, yeah, it's just not a good one. You know, it's not a good one. Because they had some massive games too before that, you know, and it was so strange too when Fielding drew against St. Paul's, and I was at the game obviously, and it was the game that I was putting up the wrong scores. So stupid. I was putting up the wrong scores, but you know it was a draw, and they were ranked 2nd in the country at that time. And then they drew 26-all, then they beat Wesley 51-0, and then they lost 38-12. Sorry, that's what I said, 48 the last time. Not even 48. 38-12 against St. John's, you know. And so it's just one of those things. It's just like when it comes to the rankings, that's what I'm thinking about. It's just like even their record, knowing who their record is, what it's showing. It has to be that impressive. It has to even look right. St. Thomas is sitting at number 8. They just lost 2. But even their record of 12-2 is such a good record, such a strong record in a competition like that. Nelson was sitting on 12-2. St. Bede's was sitting at 12-2 as well. Christchurch Boys was 11-3. and then you sort of fall down to like Calson, Tauranga, Sacred Heart, Southland boys, Westlake boys, and even Westlake boys, and Westlake boys have the same argument. It's just like, if Westlake boys is 12-1 all year, and their problem is that they're in a competition that it doesn't give them a true reflection of how strong they are as a team. You know, it doesn't give them that. It's not a strong reflection, and their loss to Tauranga boys, you know, is understandable. You know, it is understandable. But they have the same argument too. It's just like, well, I think Westlake will probably, they probably wish that 1B was added to the North Harbour comp so that they can just blow out a bunch of Auckland schools and say, look, we can smash you guys, 1B sides. It's like, think what I can do to one, and in all honesty, and like in my opinion, in all honesty, and over all the years that I've seen Westlake boys should play in the 1A. Like, they should just join those two competitions together. I don't know why they don't. It's just, you're pretty much in the same city. I don't care if we talk about this, we've got a bridge dividing like North Harbour, Auckland. Just put the competitions together and make it better. Just make it better. You guys all play for the Blues. Like, just make it better. You're all close in the same place. You'll make for better competitions, better games all around. Westlake boys is a solid 6th place in the 1A every single year. They could make the top 4, or they could finish 6th. Then they won't lose a lot of games if they played in the 1A. They won't lose a lot of games. Westlake is that good of a school. Rosmini will have their day most of the time, but they can cancel out sort of the bottom 4 of that 1A, and then you could still chuck in like teams like Massey and Rosmini and Whangarei boys and all that kind of stuff. And on their different years, even with Manurewa, on their different years, they will be highly competitive. Highly competitive. I don't know what their struggle is to put these two, competitions together, but I don't know. It's not doing any wonders for both of your sides. But Westlake will have that same problem trying to convince everybody and trying to convince the rest of the country that, no, we deserve it. They'll have to win every game by like 50 points. To say, this is how good we actually are. They'll have to score 40 points in a game consistently for 5 or 6 games and not let, a bunch of points rain in to go, yeah, this is how good we are. And that's just how convincing they have to be. But my thing is, it's like, who am I putting number 1? I actually don't know. I'll probably have it, I'll probably know by tomorrow, but I've been tossing up the idea of keeping Hamilton number 1. Because it is their first loss. But I also look at St. Peter's and I go, nah, I think actually they should be number 1. Then how far up do I move Rotorua? And does John McGlashan now deserve to keep their number 4 standings? Or do they have to be moved down? Because Rotorua has to be pushed up somewhere. They're 7th behind Napier Boys, because Napier Boys beat them. Hastings is in front of Napier Boys because Hastings Boys beat Napier. But Rotorua also beat Hastings. Rotorua beat St. Peter's in the preseason, but that's preseason. That's preseason. Rotorua also beat St. John's College, so that has to hold its weight somewhere. Fielding also has to be moved up too. St. Thomas has to drop back because they just lost. Even though their record shows how good they actually are as a team, they still lost. They still have to be moved up. And St. Bede's, they do have beating St. Peter's as a massive, massive game on their resume. has to hold its weight. But then how do you look at it and go, so what does this mean? How far up do you push up St. Bede's then? Because they could say to anybody in Auckland, they go, well, did you guys beat St. Peter's? Because we did. And no one in Auckland can go, well, you guys are useless. They go, well, you guys didn't beat them, we beat them. You know, they have that. And really the only team that's ever beaten St. Peter's this year is Rotorua boys in preseason. So St. Bede's like sitting there, they're like, what about us? If you're saying St. Peter's is the number 1 team in the country, we didn't beat them that long ago either. About a month ago? So it's right that St. Bede's is going to have to ask this question of me. Go, well, if they're going to be number 1, what are we then? You know, what are we in the rankings? Because if we can beat that number 1 team in the country, we should be at least top 5, top 6. So who moves down? Hamilton's only lost 1 game. St. John's has to move out of that spot. If St. Peter's move up, who goes to 3? Does John McGlashan deserve to go to 3? Or do they drop back to like 5 or 6? Because Rotorua has to move up somewhere for beating that number 1 team. St. Thomas have to drop down. Fielding have to move up. St. Bede's has to move up. Nelson has to move up. So what does that mean for teams like Hastings and Napier? How far do they move back? Or do they hold their spots and everybody just has to sit back behind them and go, well, we have to respect the Super 8, which has been the best competition this whole year. They've been the best competition. In Auckland, as you know that. Come on, cut it out, eh? The Super 8's been the best competition. They've all kind of beaten each other. You know, this would have been an easier discussion if Hamilton boys won, but they didn't. So they have to move out. Easiest thing is just to leave them, but it's not right. Because St. Peter's hold that strong impression that they should be number 1. And if they win their Auckland comp, they should stay number 1 for the rest of the season. Because they're a strong team to even win nationals. Now, if I'm right, I was told that Hamilton boys and St. John's, they're actually going to be playing this week, I think. Rotorua and Tauranga playing Tauranga this week to get into the Chiefs regionals and to who represents the Chiefs side. And those are going to be some big outcomes. Let's say Hamilton boys loses to St. John's, which is a high possibility. That's a high possibility that Tauranga boys can beat Rotorua boys too. They almost did this year. You know, Napier boys plays Palmy boys. It could be another one. You know. So in terms of the rankings and everything, like I'm going through these motions of like these wins and losses and how much all these wins and losses actually carry. And we're only dealing with like 1 loss teams, 2 loss teams. And the 2 losses that these teams have are to guys that are just ranked behind them or just in front of them. So they're not like big ones that you're going, oh, well, they were upset by this team that were all the way back there. It's like, no, they just lost to a team that is just in front of them now or just behind them. So there's only like these small margins of gaps that you go, wow, how do we define what this loss is? Or how do we define what this win is? And then even in the circumstances of what happened and blah, 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 whatever. I just got to figure that out. The only thing that doesn't land right with me with Fielding is that Fielding have lost to the Napier. They lost to St. John's in that first one. And then they drew with St. Paul's, which is the other one. drawing with the St. Paul's one is the hard one that they're going to have to explain, because that should have been a win. St. Paul's just outbored them, to be honest, on that day. They were just so good. And so you kind of have to look at them and be like, so what do you do? Because if they didn't have that draw and they just had the loss to St. John's and the loss to Napier, it's easier to justify why you can move them up. And you're like, oh no, that's fine. But if you go look at it and go, well, they drew with St. Paul's. St. Paul's were ranked all the way back there. It's like, well, yeah. And so, as you guys watch this, you can go on the rankings and have a look and see what I'm talking about. And, this is kind of the thing that I am looking at right now. Now what, I guess, for you guys, tomorrow morning is probably going to be the time where I have all the rankings out. And then you guys can call me an idiot for making the wrong decision of making who number one, or who stays number one, or who's number 2 and 3 and 4. And I don't know if John McGlash and guys will be angry if I leave them there, move them, or move them back. But your strength of schedule and who you've beaten and who you've lost to is all going to matter. And that's how we get these rankings, and that's how much of a headache and like a mental discussion I have with myself of like why someone should be number 1, or why someone should be number 2 or 3 or 4 or top 5 or top 10. I mean, Hamilton boys, 10 games, 9 wins, 1 loss. St. John's, 12 games, 10 games, 2 losses. St. Peter's, 13 games, 12 wins, 1 loss. John McGlashan, 12 and 12. Hastings boys, 11, 8 and 3. Napier boys, 12 games, 10 and 2. Rotorua, 12 games, 10 and 2. St. Thomas, 14 games, 12 and 2. Fielding, 12 games, 9, 1 and 2. That's 1 draw. Nelson, 14 games, 12 and 2. St. Bede's, 14 games, 12 and 2. Christchurch boys, 14 games, 11 and 3. And that's all the way ranked down to number 12. So there's 12 teams all in that section of the all potential top 5s, and all have massive good arguments to say why they should be in that position. But that's what most of this is all about. This is why I'm taking so long, because I want people to look at it at the end of the season and go, well, this is how it ended up, and it's fair based on all these games that they had, and also with how everyone's regions are going to go, why everyone ended up where they ended up at the end of the year, and go, yeah, they had a pretty good season, watching them throughout the whole season. But that's me from High School Top 200. Herschel Froon. Later, ball.
Go,